Okay, do you remember in a couple of videos back where I had two equations, one on the top and one on the bottom? In the last video, we expanded out the one on the top. In this video, we're going to expand the one on the bottom. You're going to love this. This equation got so massive that we actually had to draw it all the way down to here. Okay? Now then, what is cosine A times cosine A? Well, that's cosine A squared. Now, what you do is you find the cosine of A, then you square it. Okay? Now, what is cosine A cosine B plus cosine A cosine B? Well, that's okay. And actually, it's going to be negative cosine A cosine B plus negative cosine A cosine B, which is negative 2 cosine A cosine B. Okay. This would be like, on this term, if you were using x's instead of all this, you'd have an x squared, then you'd have a negative 2x. Okay. Now, what about this one? Well, what is cosine B times cosine B? Well, that would be like taking x times x, which would be x squared. So now you have cosine squared B. What do you do in this one? You first find the cosine of B, then you square the number. All right. So, here we go. We've got sine squared A. Where do we get that? Well, sine A times sine A is sine squared A. Remember, what you're going to do is you're going to find the sine of A, then you're going to square it. Okay? Now, how did we get the sine B? How did we get this here? We started off with negative sine B. See this? It started off as negative sine B. But what you were doing is you were subtracting a negative sine B, so you changed it into a positive. So you have sine A sine B plus sine A sine B. You have 2 sine A sine B. Okay? Now the final term was taking sine B and squaring it. So now you have sine squared B. That's where we got that from. You first find the sine of B, then you square it. So that's the bottom equation all expanded out. Now then, can we start eliminating some terms? You betcha. How do we do this? Well, on this bottom equation, we have the Pythagorean theorem. This is how we're going to eliminate this. All right? Now, what is cosine squared A plus sine squared A? Well, if you'll remember, we had if you take the cosine of a number and square it through the Pythagorean theorem, let me illustrate this. What we're in essence saying, okay, this is supposed to be a right triangle. I know it doesn't look like a right triangle, but you have x and y here. So you have x and y here. We know this is going to be 1 right here, because the hypotenuse of all these triangles is going to be 1. So, x squared plus y squared is going to be 1. Well, cosine squared and sine squared, okay, is going to be added together. It's going to be 1. So now we can eliminate this term here and this term here. What about this term here and this term here? Well, cosine squared b plus sine squared b is going to be 1. So now we can eliminate this and eliminate this. So now, instead of having those 4 terms, we're going to have 1 plus 1, which equals 2. Because obviously back in early arithmetic we learned that 1 plus 1 is 2. So what we're saying here is that cosine squared A plus sine squared A, x and y here, if we squared both of them, will equal 1. And then cosine squared B and sine squared B, well, that's again x squared plus y squared is going to equal 1. Because the square root of 1 is what? 1. That's what it is. So that's how we can eliminate all those terms. And that makes our equation a lot prettier. Alright, I'm going to tell you more in the next video, so stay tuned.